Ladies and gentlemen, strap in and wake up. Have you ever dared to ask why Mexico, a nation throbbing with vibrant culture and overflowing with untapped wealth, has been the relentless target of foreign lust, bloodshed, and betrayal across centuries? This isn't random chance. It's a pattern carved in stone. Today, as the world teeters on the edge of geopolitical chaos and power grabs shift into overdrive, Mexico's once again the bullseye for international appetites. In this unflinching, no-holds-barred plunge, we'll tear through the savage history of invasions and manipulations that have pummeled this land into submission time and again. And then, we'll slam it head-on into February 2025, where Donald Trump's latest chest-thumping and a shameless flood of Americans and Canadians storming south are stretching Mexico's legendary hospitality to the snapping point. History isn't just repeating, it's bellowing in our faces. Stick around as we rip open the shocking, infuriating threads tying yesterday to right now. Our saga starts long before the 16th century. The land we call Mexico was a brutal arena of clashing civilizations. Olmecs, Zapotecs, Mayans, and then the Mexica, the Aztecs, who didn't mess around. These warriors scratched and clawed their way to dominance through sly alliances and merciless campaigns, crushing rival city-states to forge the Aztec Empire. Picture this: Tenochtitlan, their capital, a sprawling, blood-drenched marvel, a towering screw-you to anyone dumb enough to challenge them. At its peak, it housed over 200,000 people, larger than any European city of the time. Aqueducts, floating gardens, towering temples, and markets buzzing with trade from every corner of Mesoamerica. But power breeds enemies. Enter Hernán Cortés, a gold-obsessed Spaniard with a hunger for glory and a knack for chaos. In 1521, he storms in like a hurricane, links arms with indigenous tribes, sick to death of Aztec exploitation, and besieges Tenochtitlan until it's a smoking ruin. Military genius or lucky jackal? You be the judge. History's penned by the winners, and Cortés surfed a tide of resentment to victory. That vicious showdown didn't just kill an empire, it spawned New Spain, chaining Mexico to centuries of foreign greed and gutting. Think it's ancient history? Keep your eyes peeled. The aftermath was brutal. The Spanish didn't just conquer land, they gutted culture, enslaved indigenous peoples, and imposed the encomienda system. Entire villages were ripped apart, forced to mine gold and silver, while their ancient ways were erased by the cross and the sword. Diseases like smallpox, measles, and influenza tore through the population, slashing it by up to 90% within decades. From 25 million people in 1519 to barely 2 million by the 1600s. This wasn't conquest, it was extermination with a flag. Fast forward to the 19th century, Mexico's barely breathing when Spain barrels back in 1829, itching to re-collar its runaway colony. They didn't bank on indigenous fighters and scrappy militias, freshly forged under Mexico's new flag, shoving them back across the sea. Freedom came, but holy hell, at what cost? Spanish forces, salty and spiteful, unleashed hell, massacres, torched villages, scorched earth rampages that left indigenous communities in ashes. Independence was theirs, but the price was a butcher's bill soaked in blood. Then, in 1838, France pulls off history's most absurd power play, the Pastry War. A French baker whines about wrecked pastries in Mexico City, and boom, French warships are hammering Veracruz, blockading ports, and flexing imperial muscle under a laughable excuse. It escalated fast. Cannon fire ripped through coastal cities. Mexican defenders bled in the streets, and the government, cornered and broke, paid up to stop the onslaught. Economic mask, imperial fist. The Mexican people were left seething, and not over-baked goods. But the economic damage didn't stop there. French blockades meant trade routes were paralyzed, small businesses folded, and ports that once bustled with activity fell eerily silent. The livelihoods of fishermen, traders, and farmers dried up overnight, and many families faced starvation. Veracruz, once a thriving hub, became a ghost town of rubble and despair. The scars lingered long after the French sailed away, reinforcing a bitter truth. Foreign greed didn't just take land, it crushed communities, dreams, and futures. Now brace for the Mexican-American War, 1846 to 1848, a gut-wrenching heist. The US didn't just win, they hacked off half of Mexico's heart. California, Arizona, New Mexico, gone in a flash. The Treaty of Guadalupe Hidalgo in 1848. No treaty, just a mugging, signed with US troops squatting in Mexico City, choking the government into submission. This wasn't a land swap, it was a soul-crushing theft, a blow to national pride that still stings. Mexicans didn't see a fair fight. They saw a land grab, cloaked in the pompous lie of manifest destiny. Indigenous families and mestizo farmers in those lost territories woke up as strangers, shoved aside by American overlords, spitting discrimination and displacement. That scar? It's still bleeding, fueling a quiet rage that echoes today. And here's a question to chew on. If the US hadn't stolen half of Mexico's land, would California and Texas now be thriving Mexican states instead of American powerhouses? History doesn't just shape borders, it shapes economies, cultures, and identities. France wasn't done yet. From 1861 to 1867, the Second French Intervention saw Napoleon III ram Archduke Maximilian of Austria down Mexico's throat as a puppet king. How'd he pull that off? By sniffing out Mexico's post-Civil War chaos, cozying up to conservative traitors, and chasing his own imperial ego trip. Maximilian fancied himself a noble savior, but Mexicans saw a foreign clown propped up by bayonets. Benito Juarez and his Republican firebrands fought back, years of brutal, bone-crunching war, and when French support dried up, Maximilian ate a bullet. Juarez reclaimed the Republic, screaming to the world that Mexico doesn't bend for outsiders. Triumph, sure, but the respite was a blink. The 20th century rolls in, and the US can't keep its hands off. In 1914, with the Mexican Revolution raging, they seize Veracruz. The excuse? Blocking German arms. The truth? Twisting the chaos to safeguard American cash and clout. Hundreds of Mexicans died in the streets, and the hatred burned deeper. 2 years later, Pancho Villa's border raids tweak Uncle Sam's nose, and General John J. Pershing storms in with the punitive expedition 1916 to 1917. Thousands of troops tramp through Mexican dirt, officially hunting Villa, but really flexing US might, mess with us, and we'll stomp your backyard. These weren't oopsies, they're the blueprint. Powerful nations draping greed and control in pretty lies. Mexico, over and over, was the punching bag in their global slugfest. Meanwhile, economic colonization continued. American oil companies sank their claws into Mexican soil, draining black gold while paying pennies to local workers. Railways, funded and controlled by foreign investors, cut through indigenous lands without consent, displacing entire communities. The Mexican economy grew, but not for Mexicans. Profits flowed north, while poverty tightened its grip south of the border. This wasn't partnership, it was plunder, wrapped in business suits and handshakes. Now snap to February 2025. History's not napping, it's wide awake and clawing. Donald Trump's back, swinging a 25% tariff hammer on Mexican imports, howling about drugs and illegals. It's no policy tweak, it's an economic garrote, strangling a nation hooked on US trade. Legal tangles and pushback have slowed it, but the threat's a ticking bomb. He's also branded Mexican cartels as terrorists, priming the pump for military meddling inside Mexico's borders. President Claudia Sheinbaum's fists are up, calling it a sovereignty gut punch, while US troops turn the border into a militarized snarl. Security, they preach. Control, Mexico spits back. But there's a quieter siege. Americans and Canadians surging south, fleeing their own spiraling rents, political dumpster fires, and social decay. Once a trickle of retirees and nomads, now a tidal wave, jacking up costs, displacing locals, turning Mexico City, Oaxaca, and coastal havens into expat colonies. They gush about the culture, then price out the people who built it. Is the modern expat wave just colonialism with a passport and an Airbnb account? Refuge or a velvet-gloved takeover? History says conquest doesn't need cannons, just wallets and a sob story. Corporate games pile on the pain. Nissan's sniffing the exit over tariffs, poised to gut factory towns and leave workers twisting. Tariffs and deportation threats could snap the US-Mexico supply chain like a brittle twig. Both sides would bleed, but Mexico's hit hardest. Trump's deportation drumbeat hasn't fully landed, but the dread's already suffocating migrant communities. Border cities brace for a human flood, resources stretched to breaking. Flip the coin. If the US boots millions of workers, who's picking its crops, building its homes, nursing its elderly? Agriculture, construction, hospitality, crushed. Food prices would soar, houses would stall, small businesses would fold. America's prosperity rides on the backs it's itching to exile. Talk about shooting yourself in the foot. Family splits echo old wounds. Foreign hands ripping Mexico's social fabric apart. Why didn't they stay, some scoff? Easy violence, poverty, corruption. Scars from decades of big power meddling that left migration as the last gasp for survival. So let's stare it in the face. Is economic strangulation the new battlefield? Tariffs and troop flexes don't redraw maps, but they can snap a nation's spine. Are these moves honoring Mexico's right to breathe, or just slick grabs for dominance? Calling cartels terrorists and militarizing borders reek of excuses to meddle. Do you really think this is about security, or is it just another play for control? History's a broken record. Cortés, Napoleon, Pershing, and the tunes always power, doled up as virtue. Mexico's resilience is epic, but how many body blows before it buckles? Philosopher George Santayana threw down the gauntlet. Those who cannot remember the past are condemned to repeat it. Mexico's saga, from Aztec defiance to today's border brinkmanship, is that warning in neon lights. As global citizens, we've got to shred the propaganda, call out the game, and fight for a world that doesn't just rerun this brutal script. What side of history do you want to be on? Thanks for riding this jagged wave through Mexico's past and present. Don't just sit there, challenge everything. If this hit a nerve, smash that like button. If you're done watching history repeat itself, subscribe for more no BS breakdowns like this. And if you think someone you know is sleepwalking through the headlines, share this video and wake them up. Let's cut through the noise together.